Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm your host, Matt Savis from the Lean Enterprise Institute. And today we're going to be talking about navigating organizational change, insights from the change questions process with our speakers, Dr. Lynn Kelley and John Shook. Before we get started with the webinar, a couple of things we'd like to cover. First, I'd like to introduce the Lean Enterprise Institute. If you're not familiar with LEI, we are a nonprofit organization based in Boston, Massachusetts, founded by Dr. James Womack in 1997. And our mission is to make things better by advancing lean thinking and practice. We do that a variety of ways. We publish books. We host events like this. We do trainings and a bit of consulting with companies. And we post a ton of free content to our website, lean.org. So if you're not familiar with it, check it out. We also host an annual event called the Lean Summit, and that's coming up March 19th and 20th in Carlsbad, California. We have a great lineup of speakers from companies like Honda, GE Appliances, Miller Knoll. Check more out at lean.org/summit. And if you register before January 31st, you save a bunch of money. Register a group of 5 or more, you save $300 extra. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers, Dr. Lynn Kelley and John Shook. Lynn is a distinguished professional with extensive experience in engineering, supply chain, and quality across a variety of sectors like healthcare, academia, and manufacturing. She retired from Union Pacific Railroad in 2018, where she led innovation and operations, and she now advises at BBH Capital Partners. Previously, she held leadership roles at Textron and was an executive at Doctors Hospital in Detroit. She holds a PhD from Wayne State University, an MBA from Michigan State University, and a bachelor's from the University of Detroit Mercy. She's also a published author, and that's what she's going to be talking about today. Her new book, Change Questions, a playbook for effective and lasting organizational change, which she wrote with our other speaker, John Shook. John is an industrial anthropologist who gained expertise in lean management during his 11-year tenure at Toyota, working in Japan and the US. He was Toyota's first American manager in Japan and later joined their North American Engineering Center in Michigan. He played a key role in transferring Toyota's systems globally and assisted North American companies with the Toyota production system. He's co-authored several influential books, such as Learning to See, Kaizen Express, and Managing to Learn. And he served as CEO of LEI and currently serves as senior advisor to LEI and the Lean Global Network. Lynn and John, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. All right, so background on the change questions. Let's talk a little bit about it. Oh, wait a second, the digital workbook we were going to do first. I'm so sorry. There it is. I skipped one. Okay, download the digital workbook. Yeah, this is a hands-on activity for everyone. When we wrote this book, The Change Questions, we set purpose even when we wrote the book, and we said, what do we want to do with this book? And we said, we want to get this methodology in as many hands as possible because we know it works. So we did write the book, and that's for sale on Amazon. But in order to achieve what we wanted to achieve, we have taken the key questions of the change questions and put it in a digital workbook for you, and it's free. And we are going to be using it during the session today, just so that so you can use it. And if you need the book to help you, fine. But if not, hopefully the digital workbook is enough to get you going in the change questions. If you would like to download it and do the work along with us, we're only going to do one simple activity, but we just want to give you an idea of how it works. Then you can go ahead and do it. Otherwise, you can do it later after this, because we will show you the digital workbook itself while we go along. So just wanted to let you know that that's available for everyone. All right, now this is a slide. A little bit of background on the change questions. John and I are going to speak to the slide together. I'll tell you my story quickly. So when I was at Textron, and many of you maybe don't know Textron, but know the brands Bell Helicopter, Cessna Aircraft. And I was in the automotive industry, and I was responsible for implementing Lean and Six Sigma, originally in the US portion, and then over in Europe, and then ultimately was transferred to South Africa and Australia, and worked internationally with change. And I made mistakes. And every time I did, I researched what could I have done differently, because I just wanted to own, if it's not working, it's on me. Let me figure out what I could have done differently. And I was developing something that I called a change playbook. And basically what that was a list of considerations that every time I was going to implement a change with a team, we would go through this list and we'd say, okay, well, which of these are appropriate for this change? And because I was working internationally, and this is before Zoom, it had to be digital, but so I had a clunky Excel spreadsheet with every consideration, which is now a change question, on a tab, and we would all be on speakerphones all over the world, and we would have our little copy in front of us, and we would answer those together, and somebody would type in the answers, and then we'd all share it. Well, that's the digital workbook that you have now, but it's not clunky anymore. We'll show it to you. But we wanted to make this user friendly for everyone. So just jumping to the punchline, I saw initially my success rate of implementing change was like it's 30-40% of the time it's sustained. And ultimately, with this playbook, with the change questions, by the time we left Textron, we were at a 90% sustainment rate over hundreds of initiatives. And by the time Union Pacific, it was 96%. And so it works. And that's what we want to share with you. But now there's a second part of it, because that's only half. John is going to talk about the Lean Transformation Framework, because that's part of this.
Good morning, Lynn. Hi.
Hi, John.
Here we are doing this, explaining this. And hello, everyone. We have people from all over the world, which is cool.
Very cool.
Thanks for joining. And I'm sure there are people out there that have as much experience in this as we do. So this is always a learning process. So hopefully today we can have some back and forth and learn together a bit. So you can't. It's not half the Lean Transformation Framework. I was glad to be able to participate in this and share something that can hopefully move the needle and help people who struggle a lot. My own experience, actually, this exactly 40 years ago is when I joined Toyota in Japan, in Toyota City. And that was awesome. It was an amazing experience. I spent 5 years there. And my job was actually to help Toyota transfer its system overseas. So that was my job. So it helped us figure this out, and they had never done that before. Of course, in that case, they were taking their system to their operations for the most part. The first place was a joint venture with General Motors, so it was a 50-50 joint venture. It wasn't totally theirs, but General Motors had agreed that Toyota would manage everything, and they would bring in the Toyota production system, the Toyota production and management systems. And so that was my first experience, and it was huge. And I saw how powerful it can be if we can change our mindsets, the way we work, the relationships we have, the details of the work system. If we can develop things like mutual trust in an organization, what kind of change is possible? So a famous story, that particular first experience I had, it took a factory that was the worst in General Motors' entire system in the early 1980s, when they had a lot of bad factories, to the very best. And so that was cool. And then with Toyota, did something similar in other countries, Taiwan, Australia, Indonesia, India. And it seemed like, okay, this is something that's doable. It's powerful, it's doable. And then after 11 years, I left Toyota. I went to the University of Michigan and worked with a lot of folks there, where I learned a lot, including Jeff Leiker and Mike Rother, where we were teaching students, and also got involved with companies in Michigan and around the U.S. and elsewhere. Then hooked up with Jim Womack and LEI, and through that and the Lean Global Network, working with nonprofit institutes around the world. So over 40 years, just a lot of diverse experience. Many kinds of companies, big and small, every industry you can imagine, all different countries. And what happens is that usually this transformation, to use that big word, doesn't go smoothly, to say the least. It usually has all kinds of travails and problems, and also often it's just a huge disaster. And you start looking for what are some common failure modes. And so myself and others in the Lean Global Network, we started looking at that and kind of came up with this thing we call the Lean Transformation Framework, which is a mouthful. All three of those words are, kind of difficult words. But the essence of it is to approach situations with questions, because what we found was the most common, easily addressable failure mode was when people start saying, I just want to implement Lean for the sake of being Lean, as opposed to taking that thinking and the practices and applying it to their work to solve real business problems. So what you see is companies that have a Lean initiative over here, and then they run their real business over here. So companies are kind of copying a lot of the tools without understanding why. And understanding why, we'll talk a little bit more, is very important. And so we ended up coming up with five questions and categories of questions that you see here in this cool little icon that Lynn came up with. I participated a little bit, but this was something that you came up with, Lynn. It's really nice. And it turns out the way we were looking at this with these five categories was very much the same. And as we were both working on books independently of what we might write, then the result of that became a collaboration. And here we have the book and the title, Change Questions, the nice logo, and a process as well that people can be introduced to. So in my mind, the main thing is that approaching it with questions that we address with fundamental thinking, that's important, can be kind of an antidote to this idea of just implementing Lean for its own sake. So that's really exciting to introduce it to more people today.
All right, good. And John, this is your punchline.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So a reason so here's the thing. So failures and challenges with this are everywhere. But there is this kind of a common failure mode, at least one of them, which is the idea of just kind of putting in place kind of a reductionist solutionist approach. Here's a solution, I'm going to put it in place, where actually there are no two problem situations or challenges that are the same. They're all different. So if any consultant ever comes along and tries to sell you a foolproof 12-step program to deliver a perfect Lean enterprise, to quote Nancy Reagan, just say no. And I know, Lynn, this was part of your experience at Textron and other companies over the years as well. So what we call the Change Questions can help you deliver a customized approach. There's nothing magic here either in terms of this is going to take you to the promised land, but they can enable you and help you to do this. So the thing that's Lean about this is not really the questions. You can answer these questions in a non-Lean way. You can answer the questions in quite an authoritarian way, a very different kind of way. But if you apply certain essential thinking to these questions, then that can lead you to designing your own transformation, your own change that will fit your situation, that will fit you. I mean, you can imagine anti-Lean ways of answering each one of these questions, and I invite you to think about what those things might be as we go through this. So these domains of inquiry, in a way, these five areas, are things that we can approach with questions that creates an open mind for ourselves, that kind of open mindset. But then we can apply certain thinking to it, and then we can develop our own situational approach.
All right, Matt. We are going to, sorry, let me, I can go ahead and introduce this. So we're going to ask you a couple of questions, and we'd like for you to respond to the poll. Go ahead, Matt, you can explain it.
So we have a couple of questions that you can answer here. Is your organization currently undergoing a major change initiative? And my goodness, over 80%, Lynn, are saying yes. And the responses continue to come in. Then the second question, my organization is effective at managing change. We'll reveal the responses in a minute here. People are still answering. I'm surprised.
That's fine.
Over 80%
Why don't
of the people here.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. How about so you said what percentage has said yes on the first question? 80?
82%.
82, yeah. So that is the deal. If you look at the research, it tells us that almost every study I've seen said that CEOs, companies, boards, leaders expect the number of organizational change initiatives to increase. Some of them said triple, the number. And so in order, I think in order to survive, you have to change. So organizational change is not going away, and it probably isn't diminishing, and it's probably not even staying the same. It's probably increasing. And so we want to be good at it. And the next question will kind of answer, are we good at it? So Matt, what do you see on that? Are there
Well,
organizations?
I'll throw the results up on screen so everybody
Right.
can see, but the basic response is people think they're not so good at it. Only 2% strongly agreeing their organization is effective, 14 saying agree. Meanwhile, 38% say strongly disagree, and 8%, so almost half, are disagreeing.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So agree and strongly agree is really 16%, right? Am I reading that right? So 14.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Well, you're about in line. So if you look at, the studies, there have been a lot of studies done, and some of them have taken hits on, well, how do you define failure? But, there's been studies done on what's the probability that an organizational change will succeed. And what the early studies have found, some of them have said that it's a 70% failure rate of organizational change. And people have looked at that and said, well, how do you define failure? And so there's been other studies that have been done. And there was another study, and I normally give the references, but McKinsey did a 70% study. IBM ended up doing one that I think said a 64% failure rate. I did find one study that was like a 58% failure rate. So there have been disagreements on the exact number, but in any case, I've yet to come across a study that is less than 50% failure rate. So I think in general, and as you've shown here, most people don't think their organizations are that good. Now, we didn't ask you if they failed. We just said, are they effective at implementing change? But in essence, I think there's a lot of concern that change is not always successful in organizations. And so we do need to be good at change, in addition to be good at whatever we're implementing, Lean or Six Sigma. And with the change questions, when I was at Textron and at Union Pacific, we implemented lots of changes, not just Lean, but different types of changes in all different departments. And so, the questions are able to be used in multiple different ways. So we really hope that, that this can help change this whole dilemma that we face.
Yeah, that was interesting. The numbers actually came back a little different from what I predicted.
What did you think, John?
Well, I predicted kind of what you're saying, that disagree would be by far the winner. But actually, disagree and neutral were even at 38 and 38. So that was interesting to me. Actually, it's a little more positive, I guess. The experience that people are reporting is a little more positive than I expected. Only 8% strongly disagree, and then 38 and 38, which is still that's okay. I mean, it's okay. This is just a quick question.
You're right. And I see what you're saying. In the neutrals,
yeah, and it's just like, a lot of studies, including some of the ones you just quoted. I think there's always a lot to unpack in what we mean by this. I mean, I predicted more would disagree with the way it was stated, but it's maybe, I don't know, maybe organizations are getting a little bit better. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to unpack there, even with this one simple question. I mean, we asked about major change initiatives. Well, what does that mean exactly? What is a major change initiative? And one I found, there's another study, or some analysts I found that found it useful to differentiate between change and transformation. And for one story, I think one of your stories, Lynn, I think it appears in the book, is about like introducing a new supplier portal. But there are various, the book has various stories about Union Pacific, which unfortunately I haven't had the pleasure of visiting, but a lot of stories there are kind of big and small. And these are all change, and change, as I said, happens all the time. A lot of my career then has been spent working on kind of lean transformations, big and small. Some of them, but even if it's small, really trying to go very deep into this idea of what is lean thinking in practice. And so if you look at the next slide, where we kind of, which shows the question again, the question mark. And so I often think of these as the five domains of inquiry. And then in each one of those, there's some fundamental thinking that we can use to address those. And I also then, and we present in the book, there are five fundamental questions that naturally break down to more subsequent questions, second level and third level questions as well. I think the way it comes out in the book and in the guide and in the digital workbook is as 11 specific questions. And that which can be a template that people can start with. You may find that you can work with a smaller number or a larger number. But the thing is, starting with questions, and I think this is a point, Lynn, where we could kind of just briefly read those to everyone. And if you do have the book, I can address you to, I think it's on page 31, that there's an introduction to the change questions. And then starting on 34, the actual questions as we define them, as we share them in the book, are: what is your value-driven purpose? The one up in the top of the question mark there. So what is your value-driven purpose? And from there, what is the work to be done to achieve the purpose or to solve the problem that you're working on? And from there, how will you engage and develop employees? How will you engage and develop the people that are going to be solving the problem, doing the work to achieve the purpose? And from there, how will you establish a supportive management system with the appropriate leader behaviors? Which means there are subsequent questions. It means you have to identify what are the appropriate leader behaviors. What would that management system really need to be? Support how we want to develop engaged people. And then finally, it says culture here. So what are your organization's beliefs, values, the norms, the attitudes, assumptions, or the fundamental thinking of everyone in the organization? What are those? And what happens is those can be highly fractal. You can look at them at the highest level of the organization, and you can go down and dive down deeper and deeper until you get to the level of each individual's work. And that's what I think as you start to work with this, with the templates that Lynn's going to share in just a moment, you can start unpacking each one of these in a way that you design your own way forward. Now, I think the next thing, that leads perfectly into the next thing, which is I'm going to take a look at the digital workbook.
Okay, so there is a case study that runs through both the book and the digital workbook. And let me just give you a little bit of background on that. When I was working for the chairman and CEO at Textron, implementing different types of changes. And then a recruiter called me about a job at Union Pacific Railroad. And the challenge was to think of what lean would look like in the railroad. Now we're talking 40 in the operating department of the railroad. So that's 42,000 employees that aren't under a roof. They do things like repairing track and maintaining bridges and repairing locomotives and being conductors and engineers on the locomotives. They're primarily union employees, and they may not see a supervisor for weeks because they're out on the field running the trains. So what does lean look like in that environment? And I thought, I've got one more job left in me. I have one more challenge. And I want to try this. So I went there, and during the interview, they asked me, they told me what they wanted to do. And I shared with them part of what I learned in the change questions is that I said, if you want to go fast, with a timeline that just, we're going to do this by this date, we're going to train everybody by this date, I'm not your person. But if you wanted to do something that I call strategic speed, and was what actually, I didn't coin that phrase. It was an article in Harvard Business Review I read in 2004, I think, when I had just failed again and I tried to figure out what I could have done. I learned about strategic speed, which would be, we do pilots, we do experiments, we constantly check to see how it's doing, and we pivot, we coach, we do what we need to do. But if that's what you want, it will be a slower initially, but I guarantee you, I mean, I think it will sustain. And they said, no, that's what we want also. And I had their complete support, which is amazing, to do this, and a good team. And we started. And you can see they called, so Union Pacific, the abbreviation for it is called UP, and they wanted to call their lean approach the UP way. And you can see in the text what they wanted to do, and it's lean. And so that's how we started. And that case study runs at a very high level through the digital workbook. So I needed to give you that background, but with a lot of detail in the book with stories and things. Okay, so now let's look at the digital workbook.
And quickly, when as you're presenting, we have to say thank you to Andrew Hall for putting the link to the workbook in the chat. That was great. Thank you for doing that, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew Hall. Appreciate that. Okay, so this is, if you've downloaded it, or if you want to do that after the session, this is what you'll see right off the bat. And you can navigate it, of course, by putting page numbers in. Let's go here. And this is the purpose section. And so at the beginning of each of those 5 categories that you saw, you'll see color coded that matches the color of the category you're in, that section. And this is a high level thing that you can, work with your team in order to let everybody understand the purpose. And of course, the meeting agenda. And then let's go to the very first activity. So the change question, there are 2 change questions in the purpose section. We're only going to do one today, but it is, what is the situational problem you want to solve with this change initiative? And you can see you've got a goal here. You see you've got instructions of that each time you see one of these question marks, that means you've got a change question. And what we have is a sample for you. Now, we don't want to be prescriptive. Your purpose statement may be different. And we're going to do this together in a minute. And John will also share with you some feedback on purpose statements. So I don't want to go too deep, but what normally we say here is, don't wordsmith this. Just do it, right? Just put it down, one sentence, make it easy. Often the first part tells what it is you're going to implement, what is your change, and the second part says why, because the why gets to purpose, and people have a really strong desire to understand purpose. It's a study that was done by PwC said, out of all the groups, even millennials have the strongest need. So it's not like it's going to die out on us. We have a lot of people, everyone in the workforce wants to know why. And so that helps you with the purpose statement. So let's do this. Let's go back to the slides. And we have a poll for you. All right, so here's the poll question. And we just basically want you to write a purpose statement that resonates with you and your experience. One sentence, don't worry about word, just do it. We're going to read a few of them, and we're going to then end up using one going forward. So it could be a change you've recently experienced, one that you're going to lead, one that your organization has done that you'd go, oh, I wish I understood the purpose, or I do understand the purpose. Let me put it in. We just want you to get used to playing with purpose statement. So go ahead and write a 1 sentence in, and Matt, as you start seeing those, you can share those with us.
Yay. First one just came in here from Judy. Align across hospitals to provide better care for all of our patients.
Okay, good.
Okay, another one coming in here. Educating the executives of SMEs. Thanks, Raj, for participating. Ooh, now they're starting to pour in. Let's see. Improve the safety culture throughout the UK organization. We have make quality personal. Quality is everywhere. Build a high performance culture within our workforce. All right. They're really starting to come in now. I'm going to go ahead and select one to play with here.
Okay, so
Let's see.
let me go back to the digital workbook while you do that.
Okay, I'm going to try to find a good one. These are all pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I lost it for a second. God, it's hard to choose. I'll just pick one here.
Okay, and I'm going to
To
type it in.
have
So what we want to show you is when you're using the digital workbook, it's a fillable PDF, and there's all different kind of formats. Some of them they fill in a dot and then highlight something for you. But in this one, we basically type it in, and that way we can share it with our team and we can share it with leadership to get alignment. So let's go ahead. Let's type in a purpose. You tell me, and I'm gonna type.
All right, here's one. Make quality personal. Quality is everywhere.
Make quality personal.
And make quality everywhere.
Okay. So that's the what. I think John, you want to debrief a little bit, or do you want me to start? I think we had
go ahead and get started. We can look at a couple, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to do another one too, or do you want to? Okay. Well, so let me just debrief this one. I think this is great to make quality personal and make it everywhere. It's a great inspirational what is it we're going to do? And the second question, I would say the second part of this that I would like to see is why. So maybe it's implicit in here, but why do we want to make quality personal and make quality everywhere? So I think this would be okay standalone, and it could be a little bit richer if we put a why in there.
Absolutely. I mean, that is something we want to do, is have quality everywhere. I could imagine it connecting with another one that I did see up there, which was, let's see, from Danny Perea. This one, Lynn, was increase RN productivity in the infusion center to increase access. I tend to, so when that has some nice specificity to it.
Yeah.
And it leads to doing some work, which everyone's working on productivity. Everyone's working on quality. Everyone's working on cost to some degree, but we're not always doing that in an aligned way. And with a sense of really why. There's always a high level why. Quality is good, lower cost is good. These things are sometimes, we'll say, motherhood and apple pie. They're good. But on the other hand, if I'm someone doing a specific job out on the railroad all day, every day, and maybe it's hard work, and I've just got all kinds of obstacles that get in my way every day. If there's a compelling reason of why that I need to make a certain specific improvement of quality here and now, then that can really help. And most any organization can benefit from some improvement in productivity, although that can often get twisted by the way we measure it. And you see organizations deciding, especially in healthcare, I've seen this, and I bet you have too, Danny, which is where to increase productivity, well, we just need fewer nurses. And then the numbers will look like there's an increase in productivity, but to the other purpose statement, Lynn, quality may suffer. And of all places in the world we don't want quality to suffer, it's in healthcare. And but the idea when you're in healthcare of increasing productivity so we can improve access, at least in the United States and I think many countries, the healthcare that we have can be so amazing technology. There are things we can keep people alive for a long time. We can make people well from illnesses, diseases we never could before. So having that compelling why there is good, especially if you think of the fact that the problem we have is access, being able to do this for more people. Now, in fact, I happen to know that Cleveland Clinic has chosen this as something that they want to work on. They have the best, arguably one of the best compilations of technology in the world. So we'd like to make that available to more people. Okay, that's a nice broad statement. It's capacity you're creating, really. How would that translate into everyday work? Well, it could be to improve our productivity. Then you can ask these questions of how can we improve productivity, and you can break that down one step further. So now we can do some, for example, everyone loves 5S, or they love the notion of how we can have just-in-time supplies on each ward. But when we start even applying those kinds of lean tools, start doing 5S everywhere, start doing quick changeover everywhere, reducing inventory everywhere, without connecting it to a real purpose, without having that why that Lynn just mentioned, it discourages people. It can be frustrating. And often there is another more important why right over here beside it that everyone knows we should be working on. So making it specific, like improve productivity, and connecting it to a real why, which is increase access, I think is something that can work well. The thing is, it becomes something we can start with, and as we do these, we get better and better at it, as an individual, as a team, as an organization. And so we can work to collaboratively create these sorts of purpose statements or problem statements, whatever we want to call it. What do you think, Lynn?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and then we have another change question in this section, which gets a little bit even diving further, and it's where we identify expected value. So we've said why, and now we talk about, well, what is the value? And we challenge you to think about the value for employees, maybe for customers, but broaden that a little bit more. So we've spent a good deal of time on the purpose with the 2 change questions, in the sense of, we believe that it's really important to identify right off the bat, to know where you're headed, and you can do that to get alignment. And if it's easy to do, well, it's great. Then you can do it in 2 minutes. You can just write it down. And then you can make sure everybody's aligned. But if it's a struggle to even write it down, then we really needed to do this. So
I think that's really important, as you said before too, Lynn, that don't wordsmith this to death, especially not in the beginning. And this is where, again, this is kind of an idealized sequence. You do need to get to why and to purpose, but sometimes people can get hung up on that. In the meantime, okay, there are patients being turned away at the door. So whatever is enough to get started, and you can always circle back around, and you probably should. So I think a great purpose statement and clarifying the problems to be solved is really important, but the thing to do is to get going, not demand perfection from the very beginning. And that can happen with some large major change initiatives or big transformations. Right. Executives all go off on a 2 or 3 day retreat and they wordsmith this thing. And in the end, it doesn't really connect to the real work people are doing in a way that resonates anyway. So try to start getting the work done and circle back around to you can perfect a purpose statement just as we perfect work toward perfecting the work. Simon Sinek make this whole thing very famous. So start with why, which is really the same thing, Linda, you were just saying, and I agree with that. But again, we can't get too hung up at the very beginning with trying to make a purpose. Get going, and then circle back around as we need to. You may need to, these 5 questions that we present, or there are more questions, subsequent questions. There's an idealized sequence, but you may need to find that it's helpful just to begin anywhere, and then we can circle back around. I mean, if employee engagement is a place that feels like a place to start, fine, start there.
Right. And we've also helped you out here because one of the change questions involves communication, and we ask you, do you need a vision statement? So that's the one where you really do. You want that to be inspirational and motivating, and it's for like public consumption. You can circle to that whenever you're ready for it, because the other reason is sometimes what will happen is your purpose will change, because if you're doing pilots or experiments or you talk to leadership, things can change. So I think we made our point. I double made it. Sorry, John, but just get started.
No. I think it's important because the way you present this in the workbook, you follow this up with a value statement. where you're making double sure to connect, okay, that there's a why attached to to this purpose statement. I think that's important. I'll just also add that I think organizations can do this in different ways. So this is asking for you to write a purpose statement, and it's going to be followed with a value statement or value proposition. You know, whatever resonates with your organization. People write true north statements. There's the innovation author Clayton Christensen came up with something he calls job to be done. So think of, for every product, for everything you're doing, what is the job to be done? And that's a way of articulating things like this. And I'm fine with that as well. And with the Lean or Toyota background that I have, I tend to love stating things as a problem. What is the problem to solve? The problem to be solved. But a lot of people find that negative, and not whereas it's and like to tap into positive energy rather than negative energy. And I think any of that is okay. This is one of the kind of the premises of the entire book and process, right, Lynn? That this could be situational. Every organization is different. The culture, the history of the organization is different. So whatever can start you down the path, down the journey, and then you keep doing PDCA, which is introduced in the book. Of course, everyone knows the process basically. Anyway, we're going to be tapping into that to constantly be adapting and adjusting as we go forward. Anyway.
Yeah, agreed. So just before we close out the digital workbook, for those of you that maybe didn't open it yet, just letting you know kind of the format. So we have a bunch of frequently asked questions at the beginning, and John's kind of covered them, a lot of them. You don't have to do them in the order given. You don't have to answer every question. You use your situation and you create what's right for you. We also talk about after some of those frequently asked questions, you saw we have sample meeting agendas. On there, we give you deliverables that we would suggest, and also maybe after you're done with your meeting, what other work maybe you'll have to do, and maybe who else to invite. You need to invite somebody from human resources or leadership. So we've given you suggestions like that. In the digital workbook, because when I was using this globally and we didn't have Zoom and we needed to keep track of things, we used a decision log. So you'll find in the back of the digital workbook a decision log, which will help you keep track of decisions your team makes, and then also team action item list, which is different from the implementation plan. That's when you're actually launching the change. But this is all preparation before you start rolling out your change. This is getting ready. And one of the things that I wrote is in the book, this is the pre-work work. And John corrected me, and I love it. He said, actually, this is part of the whole process. I was thinking, oh, you want to change, you know what you want to do, you've got your purpose. Now, rather than just implementing, you do the pre-work. Well, thank you, John. You're right. Look at it as the whole process, that the asking these questions of yourselves and your teams will help your change break that cycle of failure, and is part of the process. So, okay, that is basically the digital workbook. I'll go back to the slides, and we want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So we're actually almost
So
Lynn, go ahead.
Before, as you do that,
yeah, go ahead.
In preparing for today, at one point we thought of actually going to the next step of that process, which gets into writing what do you call a value statement, Lynn?
Right.
One question just came up of what is the difference between like a vision statement or a purpose statement and a value statement.
Good.
And your example, you could actually even share what the way that would break down in the UP example that you were just showing.
Good. Okay, so if you have part of what happens that I've seen is that if you have a very straightforward change that's really only impacting one group of people and one thing, which often that's not the case, or I'd say usually that's not the case, then if your purpose statement is probably your value statement. However, for the most part, if you look at the Union Pacific example that it's in there, when you have a chance to look at it, you'll find that the high level purpose statement was, we're going to implement, Lean, we're going to implement UP way, we're going to do this thing at Union Pacific. But now the value statements are, Okay, so what specifically are we going to get from that? Because later on, we've got a change question that ties into it that helps you measure those things. So now you're thinking before you even announce your change to the universe, how am I going to measure if I'm delivering the value that I expected? And that's why we call it expected value. And so for Union Pacific, it would be things like, we're going to improve our customer service, which is velocity for our customers. And who's going to do that? Engaged employees are going to do that. We're going to solve problems. So who's going to do, so now you're targeting who's going to do it, specifically what's going to happen. And ultimately later on, how will we measure it? And then you refine that measurement again. But it just depends on the scope of your change. And that's why we also say you don't have to answer every change question. But I love that question. Thank you for asking it.
Well, and it also
Okay.
there would be a way to the first example that we looked at that was submitted that Matt introduced was
Mhm.
to let's make quality personal. Quality is everywhere. That would be a way then to connect that to
Yeah, that's right.
business
Good.
specificity as well. By having
Good.
both of those questions, it's a way to make sure that the point is what's the function being served is to make sure that the why is clear and understood, and maybe it doesn't happen overnight, but to get everyone aligned on what that purpose is, what the why is. And the more people are aligned on what the why is, the more we can connect all the work and the management to achieving that.
Yeah. Good. Okay. This is our last slide before we open it up to Q&A. John, did you want to do anything more? This is a summary, just kind of showing you the process.
Yeah, I think it is kind of a summary. I think we have kind of talked about it a bit. And I think getting questions, which we've had a lot of interaction already, and be happy to take any at any point. I would just emphasize again that, okay, Lynn is describing change at a large company. And Lynn is an executive, she was a practitioner for many, many years. So in our introduction, Matt, I think Lynn, you mentioned also you were at Textron, large company, where you were the vice president of a number of things, including, I think, improvement. And that's where we met probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that.
Oh, more than that. I hate to tell you, but yeah.
Yeah. So you were wrestling with these things in a very real way. I know it kept you awake late at night, many nights, and it wasn't always easy. So you were trying to wrestle this to the ground in those kinds of circumstances. I just want to also emphasize that to me, this process and these questions and this approach applies to any situation, I think. So it could be 10 people in a garage creating a new product. It could be a startup. It could be a new service we're creating. It could be software. I don't think it matters. But in that case, the way the way the questions it would break down into action would vary a bit. Now, another thing that's in the book that I think is worth mentioning is that very often what you're describing at a large organization, but also a change initiative team. A team has been formed and there's a specific thing to go after. It could also be that this is just an executive, an owner, an entrepreneur who's hired 5 people that we want to work. It doesn't matter at the highest level, but the way it breaks down is going to then be highly situational. This is the point of it being a situational approach. But even if I'm hiring just a few people to help me get one new project done, I need to clarify the purpose. I mean, the why. What is it we're trying to accomplish? What's the problem to solve? I need to then we need to dive into what's the work to do that we need to do to achieve that. We have to design it. We have to do it. We have to improve it. The people that are going to be doing that work, we need to engage and be developing them, at least according to the way we think about it. Now, there are people in Silicon Valley, for example, that don't care much about developing people because they approach it in a sense that we simply hire who we want, and then we acquire the talent we want. And when we don't need them, we let them go. As opposed to thinking, no, we're going to try to create an organization that can survive and thrive over the longer term. So if you have that thinking, that guides you to different answers all throughout here, then that would guide you to a management system and a leadership style that could be very different from, for example, from command and control. And then we could think about, the work culture we have here. And I think culture is a hugely important thing. We all understand that. It's also can be something that's difficult to define and to try to improve directly. Think about how we work together. What's the mindset that everyone is bringing to work every day? What is that now versus how it fits in with the kind of organization we want to create?
Hey.
So that kind of lays out the process of the book. What did we leave out, Lynn? There's probably some more, but hopefully people can take a look
I
at the
bet
book.
if we can get a couple questions, they'll probably identify what we left out. Right.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's get to those questions. Thanks, Lynn and John, for the great presentation here, and thanks to everybody for contributing in the chat over the past 40 minutes or so. If you do have a question, go ahead and throw it in the Q&A. And there are a bunch in there already, and one here has a bunch of up votes. This is from Eric Santa Maria. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Eric asks, he's worked with large companies and tech companies. They struggle with question number 1. What is the situational problem you want to solve with this change initiative? What do you do when a company is missing the foundational skill of understanding their problems instead of leading with solutions?
So
John,
what do
I
you
want
do?
you to
It's a
do
great.
this.
Hopefully this doesn't sound repetitive when I say that is in fact the intention of this process is as an antidote for exactly that. If we go through these questions we endlessly repeat them. This is what is something, not something you do up front and then you're done and move on. You're always asking and clarifying, why are we doing this? And the thought process is we have the question, the fundamental essential thinking, and then the actions that we choose, the solutions that we go to. So if we can start making a habit of asking those questions, asking ourselves what kind of thinking are we bringing into the situation to address them, and then as we consider how we're applying those to the solutions, the approaches we choose, we can change the mindset over time. This is the intent. We also know that changing mindset is not an easy thing. We do advocate with this process of being aware of that and simply elevating that as an area that we can try to address. I think is a contribution. And if people give it a try, please let us know what kind of results you see.
And the other thing is, part of it is where you are in the organization and how much power you have, right? So if you are a leader and you're implementing a change, then hopefully if you would have the power to use this to be able to have everybody talk about purpose and align rather than jumping right to some solution without identifying the purpose of it. But if you're having change done to you and leadership hasn't given you a purpose, and you've got people coming to you asking, well, or your colleagues or your peers or people reporting, you say, well, what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? Part of what I think we need to do is, as much as possible, is even in the organization, even if for the whole organization no one said why or implementing something big, we can try as hard as we can to find out by asking the questions and trying to feed it to somebody who can answer that question. There's just been so much research. I like to lead it with research. There's so much research on why people have to know why. And the thing is, if we don't give that to people, we've increased our probability of failure. So people deserve to know why. So if you can somehow communicate that people also have a need, they may really want to do this change, but they have a need to understand why you're asking it, and maybe that will help people to take a step back and give some information out there. It's difficult, depends where you are in the organization, but it's a problem. I agree.
Well, you might be
Well,
the leader of a 10-person organization, but I think just to follow on what you said, Lynn, is great. So people often say that people don't like change. I think, to quote you there, that people don't like change that's done to them, and changing that dynamic is a big key. I think. It sounded like, Matt, you had another or two.
Well, it was
see a bunch
related
of great
to something
questions
that
there.
it was something related to what Lynn was speaking about in terms of authority, power, level of influence. But Rick Martinez, he's asking about what if you're not in a position of authority, leadership inside the organization? What if you're in the middle?
Yeah.
How do you promote change from that area of the
Yeah.
organization?
And so if you're in the middle and you can use it. I've used the change questions in the middle. I didn't always lead departments. I was at one point, working on the shop floor, trying to get people to buy into different kinds of change, and they didn't report to me. And just with influence, part of the learning, and I'm not trying to push you back to the book, but part of the learning that I found in trying to navigate those situations comes out in the change questions. So if you know that you'd like to implement a change and you have to get peers together to help with that or to sell it to leadership, part of what I've done is worked with the change questions list all by myself and just answered them. So I really have, I don't want to say ammunition, but I have well thought out plan about why it's important and what we can do, and then start there. We can implement change from the middle. It's just harder, but we can do it. And there's been a lot of change, good change that's happened from the middle. It really has. And like-minded people will also, bring that forth. One other thing real quick, I want to have time for another question, but I also want to say, if I have enough power to do an experiment or a pilot, even if I get peers together and we can do an experiment and say, let's just try this. What are your ideas? And we have enough power to do that. And then we can show leadership, look, we did this. Or maybe we have to ask permission first, but whatever, we want to do this. Can we try it for a day? People have a lot more, people just don't want to risk the whole thing. So it's a small risk for them to say, yeah, you can run an experiment, or, do it after hours if you don't, whatever. Getting data will help you do that more.
We're running out of time, but could I add to that one?
No, I'm teasing you. Yes, of course. I love your words of wisdom.
Well, so Toby in the chat said that if you're a leader who would get this, you're probably not on this call, which I think is made me laugh. But also, back to the earlier point that people don't like change that's done to them. Here's where it's not just the question, but the thinking we put in how to answer the question. Lean thinking is not something to do to an organization. This is very important. Lean thinking is something for each person to bring to their work. So it doesn't matter if I'm a janitor or a street sweeper or in the middle or I'm at the top. It's a way of thinking about reality, the world, and how I can manipulate that, change that in ways that can make it better. It's something to apply to your work. Now, if you're a CEO, you have more power. You can apply it to an entire organization. But if you're sitting there thinking that, gee, I wish our leaders were leading this, be careful what you wish for. Most leaders have been through careers where they were it was ingrained in them to think in a very, very different way. Think in terms of for each person, how can I apply this thinking to my situation? And my situation has both the technical part, the mechanical part of the work, but also the social part, how I work with my peers, how I work with my staff, how I work with my boss. So we can all apply that to our work, I think.